Welcome to Basket Weaving with Textile Indie. My name is Brittany. I'm a basket weaver and fiber artist, and this is part 3 of a 3-part series where we are completing this handled storage basket. This is a basket in our basket weaving series on the Textile Indie Collective, which is a membership for fiber arts and textile enthusiasts who want to dabble in lots of fiber crafts. So check out more about the Textile Indie Collective using the link in the description below, and you can also find the instruction manual that goes over all of the steps and the pattern for this basket in the description below as well. Today we're going to complete cut and tuck, set up the rim, and lash the rim to finish off this basket. There's more suggestions and options in the Textile Indie Collective workshop for this basket if you want to delve even deeper. Our next step is going to be one last row of 1/4 inch wide around the entirety of the basket. So go ahead and set this up on its side and start your row wherever you want, weaving an over under like so. And then we're going to jump over the gap. Make sure you continue that same over under pattern and look from the top and pull on this so that it mimics the same depth as the handle, and then continue around, jumping over that gap, tightening that up to the right tension, and then meet your starting spot by going over one, under one, and doing your 4-stake overlap. Cut that, tuck it behind, and that is your last row of weaving. If you want more on basketry and other fiber arts, sign up for our email update list. We send out a weekly email with new content from the Textile Indie universe, as well as resources and suggestions and prompts for creativity. Before we start cut and tuck, go ahead and spray down the top of the stakes all the way around the basket on the inside and the outside. You're going to come in and all of the stakes behind that top row of weaving, you're going to cut flush with that top row. Now we're going to come in and fold over all of the rest of these stakes to the inside of the basket. So these middle pieces that are folded to the inside, you're going to measure down and cut it so that it goes just to the base of this 1/2 inch row here, and then take your packing tool, shove it under those rows that are on top of the stake and lift these away. Slide this under those rows like so that it's hidden and sandwiched under those rows. In other places you might not have the 1/2 inch to go under, so you may need to go under 2 rows of the 1/4 inch wide. You can cut the stake to that length. The cut and tuck that we just completed finishes off the basket and holds the basket together so that when we put the rim on, it doesn't just pull the whole basket apart. So for this, you're going to grab your rim reed, and for this I'm using 5/8 inch wide flat oval. I'm going to loop this around the top edge, making sure to catch all the way around, and measure out a piece with about 2 inches of overlap. Cut that to length, and then take a second piece and cut it to the same length. So you have 2 pieces. This will be your inner and your outer rim. Put it in the water bin for a few minutes to soak to ensure that it's nice and pliable when we start to work with it. Allow it to soak for about 5 minutes before you pull it out to ensure that you can bend it and mold it the way you need to. Both pieces on one end, we're going to trim away some of this rounded end. For this, you'll want a box knife or some sort of sharp blade that you can cut away some of the thickness here. So I'm going to anchor my hand against the table holding the end, and about 1.5 inches from the end, I'm going to just catch a little bit of the material at a time to trim away the rounded side and try to get down to a flat reed-like thickness. And by trimming some of this material away, what this allows is that when we overlap the 2 pieces around the basket, it leaves not as much or not as thick of an overlap. If we overlap with 2 pieces that have that rounded that we've not trimmed down, it's going to be a lot bulkier and take up more space and stick out more. So to eliminate some of that sticking out, we come in and we trim some of the material away to thin it down. I like to use the plastic 2-inch spring clamps for the rim because they have a nice wide space. And I'm going to put my trimmed down end first. So we're going to put this on that top row of weaving. So just cover that top row of weaving and clamp this in place. You really want to sink the clamp down over the entirety of the reed. Don't try to clamp it like this or it's going to pop off and fling away, and then you won't be able to find it. So from here, we're going to feed the rim around the upper edge of your basket, making sure to keep it nice and snug to the surface of that top row so that you don't end up with any bubbling or gapping. You don't want too much reed, and you want just enough to make it all the way around, like so. And any basket that I do, if it's a medium size, I do 1 clamp per side to hold the rim in place. More clamps than that tends to be frustrating to work with once we start the lashing. So just having 1 per side holds the rim in place, it holds its shape, and then we don't have to fight it when we're doing the lashing. Once you've come all the way around, go ahead and take your shears, and right where I started this trimming, there's a curve here on the reed. I'm going to cut this just inside that curve. So when I layer these two, the curve shows, but the flattened end doesn't. And then to add a little bit of a finish, I come in and I cut the corners away like so, and then I round these off so that it's just a little bit more rounded, looks more purposeful, and like I meant to do it than just a blunt end. So then I'll put the clamp over that joint where those two overlap is called a joint. Now we're going to do an inner rim. So taking your inner rim, you want the rounded side to be to the inside of the basket. We're going to feed this the opposite way that it wants to curve. It wants to curve so that the rounded side is out. So curve it so that the rounded side's in. And then we're going to place the joint for the inner rim on the other side of the basket. So our joint for the outer rim was over here. We're going to do the joint for the inner rim over here on this other side. So again, starting with the trim down piece, come in, clamp that in place, feed this to the inside of the basket, making sure you have enough material to fill that space, and you'll use the same clamps. You'll just lift them off and put them back in place. When you get to that joint, lift it off and crimp that with your fingers so you can clamp over it without it coming undone. And you want enough to fill these curves and to sit against the inside of the basket, or we'll end up with gapping. Again, I'm going to trim this down to that same place where that rounded edge is, and then I'll trim these down a little bit to round this out. Make that look purposeful, and then put the clamp over that joint. And now we have an inner rim and outer rim, and we can still see the cut and tuck edge inside that channel in between the two pieces. I like to use a seagrass, and I come in and tuck this into the basket between the two rims, and this sits on top of the cut and tuck. And then feed this around into that channel, again using the same clamps, making sure you don't lose your joint location. Now cut about 1 inch excess. This is just security to make sure that you have enough to go all the way around. Now we're going to lash the rim together using a 1/4 inch wide flat oval reed. I suggest getting 2 very long lengths out of your bundle, the longest pieces that you have available. We are going to use 2, so we'll start a piece, work with that until it runs out, and then start another piece to incorporate. Because we're going to do wraps to hold the handle together, it takes more reed than other lashing projects. So pull out your 1/4 inch wide, get it wet, and then pull a piece out so that you can work with it. We're going to start to one side of one of our joints about a hand width away. So if you put your hand on top of there, my joint's here. I'm going to start right about here, kind of where this seagrass begins. And I'm going to take the rounded side facing up, send this end in between the basket and the inner rim so that it comes out like this, pull down a bit, and then fold up so that you're just crimping it around the bottom edge of the inner rim. And then take this in that's sticking up, send it back against the basket, between the basket and the inner rim, and then the end should poke out here. You'll pull down like so. So you've just created a loop around the inner rim. If your rim has a little bit of buckling or cracking like this where it's bubbling out, don't worry about that. That is going to get sandwiched into the lashing and pushed down. That sometimes happens when we do this inner curve where we're curving the flat oval reed in the opposite direction than it naturally wants to. So it is a natural aspect of working with a natural material. From here, we're going to flip to the outside of the basket and lift up this outer rim so that we can see that top row of weaving. Grab your packing tool and in a space close to where you put your starting loop, bring your packing tool in between two stakes under that row. Place your packing tool so you know where to go in. We're going under the top row between these two stakes. Now, the reed is very long and we're working with a piece that is flat, which means that if we just pull it through willy-nilly, it's going to start to corkscrew and we're going to cause cracking and breaking in the reed. So to avoid that, if you come in, bring it to the outside of the basket, we'll be stitching from the outside to the inside. Bring your thumb against the rounded side of the reed and start to slide this through your fingers like so, keeping the rounded side against your thumb. Then rounded side facing the bottom of the basket, you'll send this through that space. You can remove your packing tool and pull this all the way through like so. Come in and eke that seagrass up to the surface, pull nice and tight. And I like to pull out in parallel with the bottom of the basket because this keeps the reed nice and strong. If you pull up, you're shredding the reed right along that bottom edge, and so your reed's more likely to break. Then you'll flip this up and around back to the outside, glide this through your hand once again, keeping your thumb on that rounded side. Take your packing tool and create a space between the next two stakes. We're going between every single pair of stakes. Send that through, pull through. And then from the outside, again, pull tight. You can come in, lift up that seagrass, get that up to the surface so that you can see it. And I like to sandwich tight enough that it holds that seagrass right on the top so that I can't see the cut and tuck. Again, I'll flip this to the outside, prop this up, send this through my fingers, create a space between the next two stakes, and send this into that space, rounded side down, pull through. Make sure your seagrass is at the surface and pull nice and tight, again, straight out. Now the next space is into the handle. So here's where you have two options. You can either do spaced out stitches where you come around here and you pretend like there's stakes to work around, and you do spaced out wraps so that it wraps around like this, and you have about the same amount of distance in wraps as you would between stakes. The other option is to take these wraps, bring these and snuggle them up right next to each other, wrapping them around, pulling really tight so that you don't have any looseness, so that they sit right beside one another like this. And you'll want to pull through each time you do a wrap to make sure you don't cause frustrating tangles. When you've wrapped all the way across, you'll come out from behind to the outside and we'll go into this next space between stakes. Again, you can check to make sure you're covering just that top row of weaving. You don't want to accidentally jump down a row because that's going to cause a wonky rim or height to your basket. And don't forget to pull nice and snug, as tight as you can without breaking the reed, to ensure that your rim is tight and well packed so that it won't catch on anything and break while being used. Now you'll need enough rim to complete the wraps around the handle on this other side. So I have a piece that's about 24 inches long, which isn't going to be quite enough to go and do all the wraps around this handle space and then continue the lashing around the basket. So I'm actually going to end this right here and start a new piece. So I'm going to cut this to about 5 inches. Set this length aside for another project, and then take the end, and between the basket and the inner rim, you're going to tuck this, but tuck it so that it sits back. You're angling it back so that it's against itself. And what that looks like is your piece should be on the right and your end should come out on the left. So pull that tight down into the basket and then cut this down to about 1 inch, like so, and then grab a second long piece. And again, the same start that we did before, you're going to pull the inner rim away from the basket, tuck this in with the rounded side facing up. Bring this up and fold it against the bottom edge of that inner rim, and then take the end, send it between the basket and the inner rim again, and pull down tight so that it's a nice tight loop around that inner rim. And now we're set up to start lashing again. So again, feed this through your hand and continue lashing up until you get to that next handle hole. Do the handle hole wrapping or doing the space stitches if you prefer to do that method. Finish the lashing up until you get to where you started, and then I'll show you how to finish it off. When you come around the basket and you're coming to your last stitches, make sure to do a stitch in every space, so you will fill that last space with a stitch. Come in and sandwich. My seagrass has fallen in there, so I'm going to come in and lift this up a bit before I tighten this down. Tighten that stitch down to hold it in place. And now there's a little bit of gapping where I started this stitch, so I'm going to come and do a stitch in the same space that I started in. So right here, I'm going to send my packer in, create more space, and then send the reed end into that space. Pull tight to close up the gap, and now cut your weaver down to about 5 inches. Take your packing tool and send this into the inner rim so that it's between the basket and the inner rim, and then follow that tool. You can lift it out of your way with the end of the reed. Send that into that gap, pull down tight like so, and now you'll end these pieces by cutting them to about 1 inch, and this other piece that we started over there. Subscribe to my channel to get more basket weaving tutorials and information, and like this video because it helps support what I'm doing here. Thanks so much for doing that. Congratulations on finishing your handled storage basket. I hope you had fun weaving this and you continue to weave with me. The kit is on our shop, Textile Indie Shop. You can find that in the link in the description, as well as the other videos in this series and more on the Textile Indie Collective, where I have more tutorials and more information on basket weaving, as well as some bonus lessons for this basket. Check out our staining and sealing video where I talk about how to finish your basket for longevity using either a stain or a sealer or both to color or just maintain the natural color of the reed, whichever you prefer. For more basketry content, check out this video, and until next time, happy weaving. Bye.